Layla clung to Zoe, refusing to listen to Oliver. Helpless, he told her and Bruno to go into the bedroom so he could speak to Zoe in private. But she didn't want to leave her mother's side. Zoe caressed her cheek. "Go and play with Bruno, sweetie. I promise not to let anyone take you away. I'll be right here. Do you trust me?" Layla's eyes were red from crying. She wiped her tears away and nodded. She then left with Bruno. Zoe sighed with exasperation. "Oliver, you see how clingy she is? I know I signed a contract back then, agreeing to hand over the children after they were born, but it didn't include being kidnapped during my pregnancy and risking my life." Oliver stared at her, saying nothing. "I gave birth to them in a basement and was pulled off a cliff with Layla after you and your men surrounded us. Thank goodness we survived. For the past 7 years, my daughter has been the most important person in my life. If it weren't for her, I would have given up long ago. We need each other. Do you understand that? If you have even an ounce of humanity, and if you care about her, please reconsider. Don't take her with you against her will. It could traumatize her for life." Oliver shook his head. "It's not that simple. She's my daughter too. We agreed." She cut him off with a trembling voice. "She wants to stay with me. Please, let her go. Do it for her, not for me. You can visit her any time, but let her live with me." Oliver hesitated for a long time, but then he finally nodded. "Okay, we can work something out." Zoe breathed a sigh of relief. She couldn't believe she had convinced him to let Layla stay. She didn't dare think about the future. The only thing that mattered at that moment was that her daughter would be safe with her. Oliver looked at his watch. "It's noon. How about we have something to eat?" They ordered some takeout, and Zoe knocked on Layla's bedroom door. "Layla, Bruno, it's time for lunch. You can come out now." Bruno slowly opened the door and poked his head out. "Are you done talking?" Zoe nodded. "Yes, we agreed that Layla will stay here." When her daughter heard that, she jumped off the bed, ran to her mother, and hugged her. "I'm so glad. I don't have to call him Dad, do I?" Zoe ruffled her hair affectionately. Her heart went out to her. "Not if you don't want to, darling." They sat down at the dining room table to eat. No one said a word except for Oliver, who tried to make conversation with Layla. After the meal, he sat back in his chair and smiled at her. "Do you want me to take you shopping? I can buy you whatever you like." She shook her head vehemently. "No, I want to stay here with Mom." He didn't insist. Instead, he called Stuart and asked him to buy some clothes and toys for her. His assistant dropped the items off a while later. Layla was reluctant to look inside the shopping bags at first, but when Oliver showed her a beautiful big doll, she was pleased. She held the doll carefully in her hands, examining it. She remembered seeing it in the window of a toy store and wanting it, but her mother had told her that it was too expensive. Zoe watched her eyes light up, and she suddenly felt sad that she couldn't afford to buy her daughter such things. Layla and Bruno started playing with the new toys. Oliver sat down next to them on the carpet, watching them with satisfaction. He thought about how happy Reggie had made him. Before he was born, Oliver had only been able to think about Esther, whom he had fallen in love with at a young age. He had believed that there was nothing on earth more precious than romantic love. But then, she had gotten married and started her own family. His feelings toward her had changed from love to affection, and since then, whenever he thought about her, it wasn't with the same gut-wrenching pain as before. When Esther had taken her kids to Havana during the winter holidays 4 years ago, he had been surprised to realize that he was no longer in love with her. His greatest obsession had not withstood the test of time. He had dated after that, but he wasn't looking for love. He didn't think he would ever get married. Relationships were too complicated, and he didn't want all the family drama that accompanied marriage. He didn't believe a woman could satisfy anything other than his physical needs. and he was afraid of someone interfering in his and his son's life. He realized at that moment that all he needed were his son and daughter, who were healthy and happy. It pained him to think about leaving Layla with Zoe, but he couldn't bear to see her crying again. He only wanted what was best for her, even if it tore him apart. So, he decided to ease himself into her life until she finally accepted him. The daunting task of telling Reggie about his mother still lay ahead, and he had no idea how he would handle it. He finally got up and smiled at Zoe. "Thank you for taking such good care of Layla. She's very special. Just hope she doesn't hate me." Zoe was surprised to hear him say that, but what he said next shocked her. "I've decided to tell Reggie the truth about you. He deserves to have a mother, just like Layla deserves to have a father. You can come and visit him after I've told him." She started shaking. "Really? Do you mean it?" He nodded. "It's only fair. But just to be clear, he's staying with me." Zoe was so overcome with emotion that she stammered as she spoke. "Thanks so much. Thank you, Oliver. I can't wait to see him. I've thought about him so much over the years." "Okay. Well, I gotta go now. I'll be in touch." Oliver then took a picture of Layla with his phone. It was already dark by the time he left. On Monday morning, Zoe got Bruno and Layla ready for school as usual. They attended a private elementary school in their district. Isabella paid Bruno's fees, while Zoe had saved up to send Layla there. She was surprised to see a luxury car parked in front of the villa when they walked out the door. A chauffeur in a suit approached them, and he tipped his hat. "Hello, Miss Chevis. My name is Lloyd. I'm Mr. Williams' driver. He sent me to take the kids to school." Zoe was hesitant at first, but he seemed so sincere. She got in his car with Layla and Bruno, and they drove off. "Mr. Williams asked me to tell you that he's going to pick Layla and Reggie up at noon and take them to lunch." Zoe's eyes lit up. She hoped Oliver would tell Reggie that Layla was his sister. "Okay, thanks for letting me know." Later that day, Zoe went to pick up Layla and Bruno after school. Oliver was already there, parked in front of the building with Reggie by his side. He had taken Layla and Reggie out for lunch as promised, and had told his son that Layla was his sister, but he wanted Zoe to be there when he told him that she was his mother. The bell rang, and Layla was the first to run out of the school building. Bruno soon followed. As Zoe turned around, holding each child by the hand, she suddenly saw Oliver and Reggie walking toward them. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. Layla waved at Reggie. "Hi, bro. How's it going?" She still felt a bit awkward around Oliver, but she was happy to see Reggie. Reggie smiled back at her. "Hi, Layla." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Can you believe we're brother and sister? I never knew I had a sibling." "I was surprised too. I guess I can call you sis now." Bruno watched the reunion with disappointment. He lowered his head and shuffled his feet. Zoe noticed he was upset, so she squeezed his hand. "Sweetie, don't worry. Nothing's going to change. Layla will stay with us, and I'll always take care of you." He didn't say anything, thinking it was so unfair. He had never met his own father, and his mother had all but abandoned him. He hadn't seen Isabella since she had dropped him off at home after the Healy's party on New Year's Eve. Oliver approached them. "Why don't we go someplace quiet so we can talk? I know a nice cafe not far from here. We can get some ice cream and cake." Zoe nodded, and they all climbed into his car. The cafe was empty when they arrived, and they found a table in the back and sat down. The waiter brought their drinks and desserts, and Layla attacked her chocolate cake. Oliver laughed. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." She looked around at the others, noticing that no one else had touched their dessert yet. Feeling ashamed, she put her fork down and waited. "Go ahead and eat. When you're finished, Daddy can order another one," Oliver said encouragingly. Reggie looked at his father with surprise. It sounded strange to hear him say, Daddy to someone else. Oliver suddenly became serious, and he looked deep into his son's eyes. Reggie, I have something to tell you. Layla's mother, Zoe, is also your mother. At first, Reggie didn't register what his father had said, but when he saw him pointing at Zoe, it finally sunk in. He slowly turned to look at her. Zoe's eyes filled with tears when she saw his expression. He finally understood why he had felt an inexplicable bond between himself, Layla, and Zoe. But he was too young to understand what had happened. Why did you leave me? Zoe turned pale. Reggie, I'm so sorry. It was complicated. Didn't know where to find you. Did you ever look for me? Zoe swallowed the huge lump in her throat, wondering how she could explain the whole story to her son. Oliver jumped in at that moment. We'll tell you everything when you're a bit older. It was all a big misunderstanding, and it was nobody's fault. For now, let's just be grateful that we're finally together. Your mother loves you very much. His son slowly nodded. What's going to happen to Layla and me? Where will we live? Nothing's going to change, buddy. You'll stay with me, and Layla will continue living with Zoe. We can visit them anytime you want, and Layla can come over to our house. We'll do things together on the weekends, okay? Layla lowered her eyes, wishing they could all live together to be a family. After a long silence, Reggie finally agreed. Okay, I understand. Zoe's heart went out to him. There were so many things she wanted to say, but she couldn't. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she would burst into tears. Oliver signaled to the waiter, and he ordered some more cake and orange juice. They sat in silence for a while. Zoe put a small piece of her cake on Reggie's plate. Here, taste this one. It's delicious. He stared at his plate for a moment before putting a forkful of the cake in his mouth. His mother watched him intently. She desperately wanted him to accept her. Though years had passed, she had faith that it wasn't too late to get her son back. Layla was cheerful, and she lifted everyone's spirits with her jokes and incessant chatter. Later, Oliver dropped Zoe, Bruno, and Layla off at home, and they made plans to do something that weekend. During the next few days at school, Rebecca noticed that Reggie was behaving strangely. He was more withdrawn than usual, and he seemed preoccupied. One morning, during recess, she found him sitting in a corner of the schoolyard, drawing a picture of a woman with long hair in his notebook. He had written, Mother, underneath it. She raised her eyebrows. Have you found your mom? He nodded. Is she Layla's mom? He looked up at her with surprise. How did you guess? She shrugged. I don't know. There was always something special about your relationship with Layla. You two seem like brother and sister to me. And I saw you and your father leave with Layla and her mother after school the other day. Reggie didn't know what to say. After a while, he asked her if she wanted to go with them on an excursion that weekend. She shook her head. I can't. Helga's teaching me about herbal ingredients. We might even make an herbal remedy. Okay then. I hope you have fun. Just then, Fifi and Freddie, who had overheard the last part of the conversation, went up to them. Fiona was very interested in Rebecca's medicinal studies. Can I come to your house this weekend and watch you make the potion? Rebecca smiled. Maybe. I'll ask Helga if it's okay. Fifi turned to her brother. Do you want to go too? Freddie nodded. Reggie went back to drawing his mother in his notebook as the others made plans for the weekend. After their conversation at recess that day, Rebecca suddenly stopped playing with Reggie and went over to Zoe's house with him, though he didn't know why. He didn't like talking about such things, so he kept quiet and didn't ask her about it. One day after school, he found Zoe waiting for him in the schoolyard. She was wearing an elegant suit, and she smiled at him. Guess what, Reggie? I found a new part-time job." He nodded politely, not quite knowing what to say. "That's good." He still couldn't get himself to call her Mom. He had practiced countless times in front of the mirror, but it was no use. She was still a stranger to him. She arrived with Lloyd, who was parked across the street. As Zoe and Reggie were waiting for Layla and Bruno, a car came out of nowhere and sped toward them. Reggie jumped out of the way, but Zoe was wearing high heels that were difficult to walk in. As the car sped past her, she stumbled and fell onto the pavement. She moaned as she laid there, clutching her ankle. Reggie screamed, "Mom!" and he rushed to her side. Zoe instantly forgot about the pain, and she looked up at him with surprise and joy. Realizing the magnitude of what had just happened, Reggie turned red with embarrassment. He averted his eyes, and he squatted next to her to take a look at her ankle. He touched the swollen area gingerly. "It's red. Does it hurt?" Her eyes filled with tears. She was overcome with emotion. "I'll be okay, sweetie. Don't worry." He got up and held his hands out awkwardly. "I'll help you up." She grabbed his hand and pulled herself up. She marveled at how small his hand was, but then she imagined him growing up to be tall and strong, just like his father. She hugged him tightly. "I'm so happy you called me Mom." Reggie felt embarrassed by her display of affection in front of everyone. He wanted to push her away, but he didn't care. He could smell the sweet scent of her perfume, and her arms were warm and comforting. In the past, he had often wondered who his mother was, and he had longed to have one. All the other kids had normal families, but he could only imagine what it was like to be hugged and pampered by a mother. In all the books he had read and the films he had seen, mothers were always gentle, kind, and caring. At that moment, he finally experienced a mother's love, and he liked it. Zoe's ankle was hurting so badly that she could barely walk. Reggie waved to Lloyd to turn the car around and pick them up, but just then he heard Layla calling out to them. She rushed over and looked at Zoe with concern. "Mom, what happened? Did you hurt yourself?" She then shouted to Oliver, who was trailing behind her with Bruno. "Mom twisted her ankle, Dad." He stopped in his tracks when he heard her call him Dad. He looked at her lovingly, overcome with emotion. But his daughter was impatient and obviously very worried. "Do something! She can't walk, and Reggie can't carry her." Oliver caressed her cheek. "You called me Dad." Layla's jaw dropped. She hadn't realized it until then. She covered her mouth with her hand, embarrassed. Oliver burst out laughing, which surprised her since he was usually so serious. She found his laugh warm and endearing. She grabbed his hand and pulled him over to where Zoe and Reggie were standing. "Help Mommy!" Oliver smiled at Zoe, and he grabbed her around the waist to support her. She put her arm around his neck, and they started walking toward the car. Zoe silently cursed the driver who had almost run them over. She had just found another part-time job, and the last thing she needed was a sprained ankle. Layla leaned over, and then she whispered in Bruno's ear. "I just called my father Dad for the first time." He nodded absently, jealous that everyone had parents except him. "So embarrassed," she said. "At least you have a father who cares about you and treats you well." She grabbed his hand. "You're like a brother to me, so my father is your father too." He wanted to protest, but when he saw the sincere look in her eyes, he decided to keep his mouth shut. Reggie, who had overheard their conversation, felt an inexplicable sense of joy. By some strange coincidence, both he and his sister had acknowledged their parents at the same time. As he looked at Zoe and Layla, he finally felt like he was part of a real family. He knew his father loved him dearly and had been good to him, making sure that he had a decent upbringing. But he had always thought that something was missing. Though he wished his mother and sister lived with them, he felt content knowing they were around and that he could see them any time. As they got into the car, Reggie looked out the window and saw Rebecca crossing the street with Bill. She was wearing a red dress and talking adamantly. He couldn't figure her out. Sometimes he thought she was two different people. He recalled the day she had chased away the thugs who had attacked Bruno. She had been wild and angry, but several minutes later, she had treated Bruno's injuries with surprising gentleness and kindness. At school, she alternated between being loud and cheerful and moody and withdrawn. He had seen both her serious side and her carefree side. He remembered her falling into the mud when she had been collecting herbs on their camping trip. She hadn't minded at all, and had even rolled around in it. Most girls he knew would have been mortified. He wondered who the real Rebecca was. She was the most intriguing girl at school, but she had suddenly stopped playing with him, and he was too proud to approach her. If she wanted to distance herself from him, he would let her. Rebecca had an incredibly busy schedule for a 7-year-old. After finishing her homework on school days, she would watch videos of airplanes and build airplane models. On the weekends, she would study herbal medicine with Helga and go with her to the fields to pick herbs. She also practiced playing the piano almost every single day. As a Davis, she felt that she had a lot of pressure on her to do well at school and engage in extracurricular activities. Her parents and her brothers visited her every 2 months, and her grandfather, Harold, often picked her up on weekends and took him to his villa so she could practice her painting and drawing skills. She often thought about her family in New York, wondering what they were doing about the military base in Mexico. She couldn't wait to grow up and design airplanes for her father's company. Time passed quickly, and before she knew it, she was starting 4th grade. That spring, Katie graduated from Houston University and received her bachelor's degree. She was an outstanding student, so the dean had asked her to give a commencement speech to the graduating class. She was planning on doing her master's degree, and after several discussions with Emma, she decided to move back to New York. She couldn't bear to be away from her girlfriend for another 2 years. They had already waited too long, and they wanted to spend every moment together. She had agreed with Professor Benedict, her mentor, that she would complete her graduate studies in New York. She also planned on working part-time so she could save up. Katie felt nervous as she faced the crowd of graduates and her families on the university lawn to give her speech. She remembered watching Emma give the same speech years ago, aching to be with her. It seemed like a lifetime ago. She couldn't believe that, after all those years, they were finally together. She thought back to the confused and lonely girl she had been, and she marveled at how far she had come. She was an exceptional student and a hard worker. Emma sat in the front row, smiling at her encouragingly. She had promised to attend every important milestone of her life, no matter what. Her mother, Jonathan, Nancy, and Steve were also there. Katie's speech was met with thunderous applause, and she joined her graduating classmates as they threw their hats in the air. Jonathan and Emma took several pictures of the event, and they all went out for lunch afterward. The next day, Katie flew back to New York with the others. Emma had been invited to give a lecture about entrepreneurship at New York University that evening. The lecture was about to begin at 7, and the lecture hall was already packed with students by the time Emma and Katie arrived. Everyone was excited to hear about Emma's startup company. Katie looked around and noticed that even the last row of seats had been filled. Several students were sitting on the floor and on the stairs. She finally found a spot near the front and sat down. Emma went over to the podium. Katie thought she looked stunning in her dress suit and just as beautiful as the first time she had laid eyes on her. Emma smiled at the sea of faces in front of her. After she introduced herself, there was a round of applause. Katie joined in, clapping and cheering enthusiastically. Emma began by discussing the challenges graduates face after university and how to look for opportunities. She talked about her personal experiences and the difficulties she had faced in finding the perfect job. Katie looked around and was happy to see that everyone was listening intently. She was incredibly proud of Emma. She knew how hard she worked to become so successful. The lecture lasted almost 2 hours. Toward the end, Emma asked the students if they had any questions. Several hands shot up, and the session continued for another half hour. Emma answered each question patiently. She finally looked at the wall clock and smiled. "Please bear with me for another few minutes before you go." The students exchanged surprised glances, wondering what she had planned for them. "Don't worry, I'm not giving you a pop quiz," she reassured them. They laughed. She suddenly reached down and pulled out a huge bouquet of red roses from behind the podium. The students started whispering, and they craned their necks, wondering who the flowers were for. Katie was sitting on the floor near the front, so no one had noticed her. When she saw the bouquet, her heart started pounding. 10 years ago, a young girl came to see me give my commencement speech, Emma began. At that time, I barely noticed her. She pursued me for years, but I was too preoccupied to pay attention to her. That young girl became a wonderful young woman, and yesterday, I had the opportunity to listen to her commencement speech. I was lost and lonely for many years without her, but she never gave up on me. And I'm happy to say that, thanks to her, I found my way. She looked at Katie as she spoke. She waited patiently for me for 9 years, and in some way, I think I was also waiting for her. I can't even begin to tell her how grateful I am for her love. She has made me a better person, and I'm so lucky to have her. Emma left the podium and walked over to Katie with the bouquet in her hand. Katie was dumbstruck. She suddenly forgot where she was. All she saw was Emma's beaming face. It was like a scene in a movie. Emma stopped in front of her and helped her to her feet. Katie smiled at her through her tears as Emma got down on one knee. We met for the first time on campus, so it seems fitting that I should do this here. Katie Davis, will you marry me? Katie burst into tears again, remembering that she had only been a teenager when they had met. 10 years had passed, and things had finally come full circle. Many things had changed, but she was sure her feelings toward Emma would never. She nodded. Of course I'll marry you, Emma. Emma handed her the roses, and then she took out a small box and opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring. She slipped it on Katie's finger. Katie held out her hand so the students could see. They burst into applause and cheered loudly. She turned red with embarrassment. Emma kissed her and then waved goodbye to everyone. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed the lecture and being witness to the proposal. The students continued clapping as Emma and Katie left the lecture hall. In the hallway, they stopped and hugged each other as if they never wanted to let go. That night, Katie took a picture of her hand with the diamond engagement ring and sent it to the group chat. Today was the happiest day of my life. My dream has finally come true. Charlotte was the first to respond. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Did Emma propose? Congratulations. Yes, she proposed earlier this evening. I'm over the moon. How are things with you and Jacob? Jacob was at home looking at his news feed when Katie's message popped up. He broke into a wide smile when he read it. He had just completed his postgraduate studies, and the Franklin Group was finally back on track. The shareholders trusted him, and no one questioned how he ran the company anymore. He sent Katie a message to congratulate her. The following day, Jacob and Charlotte went to the cemetery to visit his parents' graves. As they approached the plot, he saw Lexi standing there. She was already an A-list celebrity, so she was forced to disguise herself whenever she went out. She was wearing sunglasses and a hat that day. He watched as she removed her sunglasses and laid a bouquet of flowers on the gravestone. Hello, Lily. Hello, Edward, she said softly. I wanted to let you know that everything is okay. I have plenty of money now, and I've become a celebrity. I'm under a lot of pressure, but I'm handling it. My grandma always used to say that if you believe in yourself, you can overcome all obstacles. I believe that. She wiped the dust off the gravestone. Everything is going well for Jacob, too. He's become a responsible, exceptional young man, and he's now running the Franklin Group. Just then, she heard a noise behind her, and she whipped around to see Jacob and a young woman approach. He waved awkwardly at her. "Hi, Lexi." She smiled. "I wanted to visit your parents. I hope you don't mind." Jacob introduced her to Charlotte, who was impressed. "I didn't know Jacob knew a big star like you." Lexi laughed. "It's funny to hear you say that. I still think of myself as a poor girl who grew up in a small village in the mountains. Jacob's mother took me under her wing and sponsored me." She moved to the side to let them have a moment alone with Jacob's parents. Jacob took Charlotte's hand. "Mom, Dad, this is my girlfriend Charlotte. We've been dating for a while. She makes me very happy. We met at university, and we've been working together on several projects. Things are going really well at the Franklin Group. Everyone's finally beginning to trust me, so you have nothing to worry about. My life is on track." He felt sad that his parents were no longer around to see how far he had come. He looked forward to the day when he could tell them he was getting married. After they left the cemetery, Jacob took a picture of Charlotte and Lexi. He and Charlotte then drove to the office. As they stopped at a traffic light, Charlotte looked out the car window and saw a bridal shop on the street. She stared longingly at the wedding dresses on display. Jacob noticed, and he smiled. He knew what she was thinking about, and he wondered whether she would ever bring up the topic of marriage. They arrived at the office a short time later. It was a busy day. Jacob attended one meeting after another, and he was relieved when he could finally leave at 6:30. Charlotte was also busy working on her design. After finishing it, she went over to Jacob's office, but his assistant told her that he had already left. She sent him a message. "Hey, where are you? I'm ready to go home." Just then, she noticed he had left his phone on his desk. Thinking he hadn't gone very far, she decided to wait there for him. 10 minutes later, another assistant told her to go meet him in the park opposite the building. Charlotte was puzzled. It was already dark outside, and she wondered what Jacob was doing there. "Are you sure?" The assistant nodded. "He's waiting for you." Charlotte was nervous about going to the park alone at night, but she figured Jacob must have a good reason for wanting to meet her there. She promptly left the office and walked across the street. She and Jacob had been to the park many times before. It had a playground, a small pond, and funny disc-shaped seats that looked like tiny UFOs. By sheer coincidence, they'd even found their names engraved in one of the discs, which Charlotte had found hilarious. After that, they had decided that it would be their spot, and it was where they had had their first proper date. She still remembered that day. She had asked Jacob to take a picture of her pointing to the spot on the disc where their names were engraved, and he had suddenly leaned over to kiss her. It had been their first passionate embrace, and she could still feel his soft, warm lips on hers. She had felt tingly with excitement. His kiss had been gentle but persistent, and she had gone weak in the knees. They had taken many photos that day. Her cheeks had been flushed, and her eyes had sparkled with joy. She couldn't believe that it had happened over a year ago. As she walked through the park that evening, she passed by the disc seat, and she smiled. Up ahead, she saw a man and a woman standing under a tree. She stopped in her tracks, thinking that it was Jacob with another woman. She peered at them, but it was difficult to see anything clear in the dark. She gasped when she realized they were kissing. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at them in wide-eyed astonishment. The couple seemed oblivious to their surroundings. She leaned against a tree to support herself. Her head was spinning and she felt dizzy. She couldn't understand why Jacob wanted her to see him with another woman. The man was tall, and he was wearing a suit, though she couldn't see his face. Charlotte was sure that it was him. Charlotte's mind was a blur of emotions. Her chest heaved, and she felt short of breath, shocked at seeing her boyfriend kissing another woman. She couldn't believe her eyes, but was determined to confront him immediately. She hurried into the park angrily. Charlotte focused on the two figures in the dark and stormed at them, pushing them apart with her arms. Jacob stumbled back from the force of her fury, and she slapped him across the cheek. She panted and took a deep breath. "How dare you! I never thought you'd—" Charlotte suddenly stopped short of what she was saying and gasped. The man she had just slapped wasn't Jacob. Although he had a striking resemblance and was wearing a similar style suit to her boyfriend, she had never met him. Her face turned scarlet, and she covered her mouth with her hands in embarrassment. Penelope, Jacob's assistant, quickly turned to her. "This is my boyfriend. He needed to see me urgently." She gestured toward a nearby lamp. "Jacob is over there." Charlotte saw Jacob standing in the distance, and she wished the earth would open up and swallow her whole. Jacob stood on the pathway. He was wearing a white shirt with a blue tie, and his fitted pants outlined his long, slender legs. She couldn't see his expression in the dim light, but he was watching her quietly. Mortified, Charlotte apologized profusely to Penelope and her boyfriend and hurried toward Jacob. He started to walk away and disappeared down a gravel path between some trees. She was about to call out to him when she saw a small blue butterfly fluttering in front of her. The butterfly glowed in the dim light and flapped its wings, as if telling her to follow it. She had been to the park several times and knew about a small clearing just beyond the trees. Her footsteps crunched on the gravel as she gingerly followed the butterfly until the pathway opened into the clearing. Suddenly, a luminous kaleidoscope of butterflies flew out of the trees and fluttered around her. She looked about in awe as their beautiful wings glistened and shone in the bright moonlight. Then, Charlotte caught sight of Jacob. He smiled, and her heart skipped a beat as their eyes locked. Two shimmering butterflies landed on his shoulder, and he stepped forward to stand before her. She was about to say something when he knelt on one knee and looked up at her with sparkling eyes. Charlotte was stunned, and her lips curled into a smile. Jacob reached out his hands and revealed a small ring box. He opened it and took a deep breath before looking deep into her eyes. Charlotte gasped, and her eyes widened. Her heart beat against her chest, and she wanted to jump with joy and excitement, but her body froze as if he had put a spell on her. She stared at him with twinkling eyes. He cleared his throat softly. "Charlotte, when I was young, I wondered what my future soulmate would be like. I tried to imagine the sound of her voice, color of her eyes, and the soft touch of her hands, but I could never picture her clearly. And then, one day, I met you." His voice trembled slightly. "At first, I thought we would just be friends, but as time passed, I began to develop feelings for you. The more time we spent together, the more beautiful you became to me, and I soon realized that I had fallen in love with you." Tears began to glisten in Charlotte's eyes as Jacob continued. "You have so many amazing qualities that are so precious to me. You are warm, generous, and pure, and your smile lights up the room and brings joy to everyone you meet." He lowered his eyes briefly before looking at her again. "For years, the sadness of losing my family lay in the furthest, darkest corner of my heart. But you have brought a light to the darkness, and your radiant energy has filled the emptiness. I want to treasure and protect you, and, most of all, make you happy." He paused and took a deep breath. "Charlotte, will you marry me? Will you be the glowing butterfly that brings light to my heart?" Charlotte wanted to smile, but the tears that had begun to well in her eyes ran down her cheeks, and she nodded. "Yes, 1,000,000 times yes. I'll marry you." Her voice trembled, and her eyes shone with happiness. Jacob carefully removed the engagement ring from the ring box and gently slipped it on her finger. It sparkled in the moonlight, and Charlotte stared at it in amazement. She felt as though she were in a dream. She beamed at Jacob and reached out to help him stand up before hugging him tightly. He smiled and lowered his head to kiss her. Her face was still moist from crying, and he tasted the salty tears on her lips as he pressed his mouth against hers. They kissed passionately while the colorful butterflies fluttered around them. The air was cool and crisp, and the evening seemed magical. Jacob held Charlotte in a warm embrace, soaking up her sweet fragrance until he was almost giddy. He lifted his lips away and clasped her delicate face in his hands. He smiled and pressed his forehead against her. "My darling Charlotte." She nuzzled her face into his chest and sighed happily. Jacob grinned. "Did I see you slap someone earlier on?" Charlotte blushed and looked away. She hadn't expected him to bring that up. "I'm so embarrassed. He looked just like you." Jacob laughed lightly and lifted her chin to kiss her again. "I think my wife may need to be punished for her foolishness." Charlotte felt her palms become sweaty, and she held her breath. She kept quiet for a few seconds. "How shall I be punished?" Jacob pretended to think about it. "Come to my house tonight." Her throat tightened, and she felt her ears turn red. "Jacob, you—" Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. Jacob was full of tricks. He looked at her and laughed again. "What did I say wrong?" She had a sudden realization, and she threw her arms in the air and pouted. "You did that on purpose, didn't you? You set me up." A mischievous smile spread across his face. "Yeah, I had to find an answer to my question, and now I have it." Charlotte frowned. "What question?" He sounded amused as he replied. "I wanted to see how you would behave if you got jealous. It turns out that you're quite fierce." She put her hands on her hips. "Yeah, I'm fierce, and don't you forget it." She then hooked her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. She playfully bit his bottom lip and whispered, "You're mine, forever and always." He sighed softly and winked at her. "Yeah, we can start practicing tonight for our wedding night." Charlotte pushed him away playfully and stomped her feet. She burst out laughing and spun around. Jacob smiled, and the luminous butterflies followed them as they walked arm in arm back through the trees. That night, Charlotte went with Jacob to the Johnson family mansion. She had never been there before, and she felt nervous. She stared out the window as they drove down the tree-lined streets, occasionally glancing at him. He seemed calm and confident, which made her feel doubtful. The car turned down the driveway, and Charlotte gazed at the beautiful sprawling gardens until they reached the front entrance. She pouted and sounded slightly sour. "Have you brought many girls here before?" He smiled and leaned over to kiss her. "I don't remember." Charlotte pulled away and frowned at him. "You don't remember? Or you don't want to tell me?" He looked at her wide eyes and laughed. "No, I'm only joking. You're the first and only." She blushed, surprised that he would tease her like that. He didn't usually behave that way, and she wondered if it was because they had become engaged. He unlocked the front door and gestured for her to step inside. Taking his hand, she whispered to him, "Will you always tease me, even after we're married?" He was about to answer with another playful remark when he saw the worried look in her eyes. He hadn't realized she could be so sensitive and suddenly felt sorry for her. He wanted her to be happy and confident, not doubtful and unsure of his intentions. He looked into her eyes with a solemn expression. "My little butterfly, I don't know if other men change after they're married, but I want you to know that I will love you and cherish you every day like I do now. There's nothing more important to me than your happiness." She gazed up at him and saw that he was speaking honestly from the bottom of his heart. She tilted her head forward and kissed him. "I love you." He began to tremble and kissed her back. I love you too. Their lips locked, and they stumbled into the living room in the dark. They continued to kiss until they reached the couch. Jacob switched on a small side lamp and gazed at his beautiful fiancée. Her eyes glistened in the light, and she looked radiant. He put his arms around her and kissed her with an intense passion she had never seen in him before. Charlotte felt as if she were floating in the clouds. She didn't know how they had moved from the living room to Jacob's bedroom on the second floor. Her world spun as their bodies intertwined. There was a moment of pain, followed by sheer ecstasy. Her body craved his touch, and she felt as though she could be wrapped in his embrace forever. Charlotte slept soundly that night and woke up with her head nestled against Jacob's chest. As she slowly became aware of her surroundings, she thought about the previous night's passion, and her lips curled into a soft smile. She tilted her head to face Jacob. He was already awake and looked at her with shining eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her softly. Good morning, my little butterfly. She blushed slightly and smiled at him. Good morning, my darling fiancé. He brushed his hand against her soft cheeks. Did you sleep well? Her face felt flushed, and she bit her bottom lip. I did. He gazed and sighed into the distance. That's good. Charlotte wanted to ask him if he was unhappy about something, but he rolled over and gently kissed her neck, making his way up to her lips. Let me help you wake up. It was almost midday when Jacob and Charlotte emerged from their passionate lovemaking. She gazed at him as he stretched out on the bed and wondered where his energy came from. Stroking his dark hair, she sighed with happiness. They were hungry and ordered takeout. Charlotte sat at the table and watched the glow of the afternoon sun dance through the stained glass window as it made molded patterns on the floor. Jacob had finished eating and pushed his chair away from the table as he stood up. He rubbed her shoulders and kissed her forehead. Would you like to listen to me play the piano? Lost in thought, she turned to face him. Yeah, I'd love to. He took her hand and led her to the study he and Nancy had used as a music and art room when they were still children. A beautiful grand piano stood in the middle of the room. Charlotte sat down on a small stool next to an easel as Jacob began to play a mesmerizing melody. She leaned back and listened to him play. The sun shone through the window, bathing his body in a golden light. Charlotte gazed at his handsome features. His dark hair curled around his neck, accentuating his chiseled jawline. His eyes were closed, and his long eyelashes fluttered softly as he gently swayed in time to the rhythm of the music. When the tune came to an end, Charlotte clapped and smiled. I love you, Jacob Johnson. She got up and threw her arms around his neck. I love you so much. He tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear and pulled her onto his lap. Yeah, I know. After their lazy lunch, Charlotte and Jacob finally arrived at the office in the late afternoon. Penelope smiled when she saw Charlotte and gasped at the large diamond ring on her finger. I see that Jacob's proposal was successful. Charlotte's ears turned red, and she beamed. Yeah, did you know he was going to propose? Penelope chuckled. Of course. He asked me to help him set everything up. We took the mechanical butterflies to the park to test it first, and had to make a few adjustments before I could ask someone to send you to the park. Charlotte gave Penelope a bemused smile. She hadn't realized Jacob had spent considerable time preparing for his picture-perfect proposal to her. She remembered how she had slapped Penelope's boyfriend out of jealousy and suddenly felt embarrassed. I'm so sorry about what happened last night. I wanted to die. I was so ashamed. Penelope grinned. Don't worry about it. I should be thanking you. I saw the love between you and Jacob and realized I shouldn't be so upset with my boyfriend. We had fought about something trivial, and I blew it out of proportion. But seeing you and Jacob reminded me of what was important, and I think he'll propose soon. Charlotte breathed a sigh of relief. That's great. I'm so happy for you. I can't wait to see your ring." Penelope grinned even more. "You were quite fierce. Jacob laughed so much when he saw you. I haven't seen him smile like that for a long time." Charlotte felt herself blush. "He saw me? I mean, I knew he saw what I did, but I didn't realize he had been so close." Penelope looked at the mortified expression on Charlotte's face and patted her on the arm. "Don't worry so much about it. You make him very happy. Isn't that what counts?" Charlotte sighed. "I guess you're right, but he must have thought I was a fool." Penelope shook her head. "You've brought joy into Jacob's life. He'll never think badly of you. You've proved that you care so much that you would fight for him. If anything, he's proud of you." Charlotte nodded and headed to her desk. She sat down, opened her messaging app, typed a short message on the chat group, and attached a selfie of her and Jacob that he had taken earlier that day. "He asked me to be the butterfly of his life, and I said yes." Katie was the first to react to the news. She whooped with joy and quickly typed a message. "Didn't I tell you that you two were perfect for each other? This is the best news." Charlotte grinned when she read Katie's message. "It's just as well I didn't jump the gun and ask him first. It was the most romantic proposal ever." Katie suddenly had an idea and sent Charlotte a private message. "Have you thought of a wedding date yet? Why don't we have a combined wedding?" Charlotte's eyes lit up excitedly. "That's a great idea. I'll speak to Jacob and let you know. What date were you thinking of?" "We were looking at September, but haven't yet decided on a day yet." "Sounds good to me." She took a screenshot of her conversation with Katie and sent it to Jacob. He replied almost immediately. "If that's what you want, then let's do it. Tell me when and where, and I'll be there." He scrolled through the messages on their group chat and felt a lump in his throat when he read about Charlotte saying that she wanted to propose to him. He sighed, happy that he made the best decision of his life. The planning for the group wedding went smoothly, and the two happy couples eventually settled on a private resort in the Hamptons as their wedding venue. Katie and Emma had once stayed at the resort on a long weekend break and had fallen in love with the location. It was also more accessible for everyone to travel from the city instead of flying across the country. The brides had chosen to have an outdoor wedding. A plush red carpet led to a small stage with a wedding arch decorated with the most beautiful flowers. The whole setup was picture perfect. The children made up the bridal party of bridesmaids, flower girls, page boys, and groomsmen. Rebecca was missing a few days of school and had flown back home so she could attend the celebrations. She was a bridesmaid, along with Cynthia and Cassandra, while the Sloan twins were the groomsmen. The younger children, such as Wanda, Bailey, and Parker, were flower girls and page boys. Quinn was the youngest page boy. He had recently learned to crawl and was wearing the cutest little suit with a bow tie around his neck. Ashley put him on the red carpet and told him to follow his sister. The little boy wiggled toward Wanda for a while before being distracted by a squirrel that had scampered down a tree. Quinn squealed with delight and tried to catch the creature, but it spun around and disappeared up the tree again. The guests watched Quinn's reaction, and everyone burst out laughing. Astrid gazed at Emma and smiled warmly. She had met her a few times after Katie and Emma had started dating. She had always known that Katie had feelings for Emma, but she had secretly wished that Katie and Jacob would fall in love and get married. Being 10 years older than Katie, Emma hadn't been Astrid's favorite choice for her daughter, until she had finally accepted that Emma made Katie happy. She had seen the video of Emma's proposal to Katie online, and when she had seen how Emma looked at Katie, she had realized that it was true love. She knew she had to allow her daughter to follow her heart. Astrid had soon begun to warm to Emma, and when she discovered the truth about her family, she had taken her under her wing as her own daughter. She watched with teary eyes as Emma lifted Katie's wedding veil. Katie's eyes shone, and she looked radiant. Astrid wiped her tears, looked up to the sky, and thought, "My darling husband, how I miss you. Today is bittersweet, because you're not here to witness your daughter's wedding. But she's happy, and that's all that matters." The ceremony ended, and everyone cheered for the two happy couples, as they walked down the carpet. Jacob held Charlotte's hand in his and beamed happily. The guests snacked on canopies and sipped champagne while the couples headed to the beach with a photographer to take their wedding photos. As the sun set, the guests casually made their way to the reception hall. The decor was outstanding, and the tables were set with crystal champagne flutes, rose gold cutlery, and exquisite candelabras decorated with flowers. The atmosphere was lively, and the guests chatted excitedly while waiting for the couples to make their grand entrances as newlyweds. The evening wore on, and after dinner and speeches, everyone took to the dance floor to continue the celebrations. Jonathan spun Katie around the dance floor, and she giggled like the little girl he had watched grow up. She smiled at him happily. "Can you believe I'm married?" He felt a bit emotional and hugged her warmly before passing her back to Emma. "Congratulations. I'm so happy for both of you." Emma looked at him and suddenly felt embarrassed. "Does this make you my uncle now?" Jonathan grinned at her. "Yeah, I guess it does." Emma blushed for a moment before laughing. Katie didn't hear what they had been speaking about and leaned closer. "What are you two discussing?" Jonathan raised his eyebrows. "Oh, nothing. I'm just welcoming Emma into the family." Nancy walked over, hugged Katie, and hooked her arm into Emma's. "Since Jonathan's your uncle now, I believe I'm your aunt." Emma gawked at her and shook her head. She would never call her former classmate that, even if she was tortured. She shrugged and pretended not to have heard. "Are you having a good time?" Nancy chuckled. "Are you trying to change the subject?" Emma grinned and quickly whisked Katie back onto the dance floor. Katie and Charlotte had insisted on booking out the entire resort so that they could enjoy their celebrations with their family away from the prying eyes of curious onlookers. The children ran about, shrieking and pealing with laughter as they chased one another. Emma and Katie slipped away from the reception hall and strolled across the lawns to look at the night sky. The moon shone brightly, and Emma gazed at Katie. She felt unease for the first time in her life, as if the emptiness she had carried around with her had finally been filled. She lowered her head to look at Katie, who had just happened to tilt her head to look up at her. Their gazes met, and they kissed a long, soft, passionate kiss. Emma ran her fingers through Katie's long hair. "I love you, my darling wife." Katie felt goosebumps on her skin. "I love you too, my wifey." They stared at the twinkling stars for a long time. Katie sighed with happiness and held Emma's hand tightly. She had been dreaming of that moment for her whole life. She wanted to pinch herself to make sure it was real. Emma's eyes glistened in the starlight, and she pulled Katie closer. "Let's go to our honeymoon suite." The sound of the music and the children's laughter gradually faded away as they crossed the lawn and walked hand in hand to their hotel room. A large bouquet of red roses stood in a vase on the mantelpiece, and a warm fire glowed in the fireplace. The sweet scent of roses filled the air, and the dim lights made the atmosphere even more romantic. Emma hugged Katie and kissed her lightly on the face, making her way down her neck until she reached the neckline of her dress. Her touch was gentle, as if she held a rare treasure. They gazed at each other in the dim light as they slipped out of their wedding dresses. Emma led Katie to the bed, and the rose petals strewn on the cover fluttered around them as they lay down. Katie's heart started to race as Emma kissed her with intense desire. Emma looked at Katie's slim figure and sighed. She had watched her grow into a beautiful woman. She had waited over a decade to admit her love for her. Katie stared into Emma's eyes. Deep in her heart, she had always known they were meant to be together. Her heart was whole, and her dreams had come true. In the fire's soft glow, they passionately gave themselves to one another as their souls became one. The sun rose over the quiet resort, and the sound of waves crashing on the beach hummed as the tide went out. Katie woke up with Emma cradled in her arms. Her lips curled into a soft smile, and she twirled a strand of Emma's hair in her fingers. She hadn't been dreaming. It was real. She had married the love of her life, and she couldn't wait to see what their future would bring. After brunch with their wedding guests, the two happy couples waved goodbye as they went their separate ways to enjoy their honeymoons. Katie and Emma went to a quiet retreat in the Rocky Mountains, while Jacob and Charlotte traveled abroad to explore the islands dotted around the Mediterranean Sea. After the wedding, Rebecca had returned to Cuba for school. While she had been away, Kyle and his father had flown to Havana to find her. Despite the fact that Rebecca used a different surname in Cuba, Kyle had located her school and had gone to her class to look for her. His presence had attracted a lot of attention, and Rebecca's curious classmates had quickly told him that she had gone to America for a family wedding. Kyle shrugged helplessly. He had thought it would be easy to find her, but he realized he had been mistaken. He didn't have a lot of time. He was scheduled to start military school and didn't know when he would get time off again. As the years passed, Kyle's limited free time was spent with family, and he soon forgot about trying to find Rebecca. He grew taller and matured from a boy into a young man. His shoulders broadened, and he became strong and muscular from the intense physicality of his military training. 8 years passed in the blink of an eye. Kyle had grown up, and Rebecca had blossomed from a child into a beautiful young woman. She and Cynthia had finished junior school in Havana and had returned to New York to complete high school. Rebecca had also skipped a grade, owing to her incredible intelligence, and had already graduated. She hadn't lost sight of her childhood dream to become a pilot and engineer, and she was ready to start the next phase of her life. Rebecca would have to complete her theoretical training for the Air Force Academy at a military base before going to Mexico for her practical training. Because the military base was highly classified, she wouldn't be allowed to return home very often. Before leaving, Rebecca bid her friends in New York a teary farewell. She then flew to Cuba to say goodbye to her family and friends there and visit the fields of medicinal plants in the valley one last time. Fiona had matured into a beautiful woman, and she and Rebecca had remained close friends throughout their childhood. Rebecca's dark tan had long since faded, and her fair complexion made her stand out and attract a lot of attention. Fiona and her twin brother were in their final year of high school. Fiona squealed excitedly when Rebecca messaged her to say that she would be in Cuba for a short while before she started training at the Air Force Academy. Fiona and Freddie had done very well in school and were at the top of their class. Rebecca arrived at their school just before noon and waited for them on the sports field. She saw some sports equipment and quickly clambered up the monkey bars. Hooking her legs onto one of the bars, she swung her body backward. Then, she swung up again and grabbed the bar before repeating the sequence. When she had returned to New York for high school, Jonathan had insisted that she run every morning with him and her twin brothers. She had also practiced boxing with Jimmy, Norman's son, and was in great physical shape. Her body was toned, and she had a strong core, so doing sit-ups on the monkey bars was a breeze. After doing a dozen odd sit-ups, she gazed across the sports field and noticed 2 teams playing a basketball game. She flipped backward and landed neatly on her feet before she walked toward the basketball court. As she approached it, one of the players missed a 3-point shot, and the basketball flew over the fence in her direction. One of the players hurriedly called out to her, "Watch out!" Rebecca stepped back and effortlessly reached into the air to catch the ball. She caught it with both hands and grinned. The players gasped in surprise. They hadn't expected such a pretty girl to be able to catch a ball so effortlessly. They gawked at her as she ran over to them, still clutching the ball. She ran onto the court and threw the ball toward the net. It arched through the air and passed through the basket, making a perfect 3-point shot. The players shouted and cheered with excitement. One of the boys walked over to her. "That was amazing! How come I've never seen you here before?" Rebecca smiled. "I came from America. I just arrived this morning, and I'm waiting for my friends to finish class." The boy gasped. Wow, are you still in high school? Rebecca laughed. Not anymore. I graduated a year early. The boys chatted, and one asked, Hey, do you want to play a game with us? Because Rebecca was early and had some time to kill, she eagerly agreed. Sure, which team should I join? The boy grinned. You can join our team. He turned to a tall boy standing beside him. What do you say, Reggie? Can she play with us? Rebecca looked at the boy and frowned slightly. She raised her eyes and met his. He was tall and thin, but he was very handsome. His eyes were pitch black, and he had a domineering presence. She felt he looked vaguely familiar, and she racked her brain to remember where she knew him from. Suddenly, it occurred to her, and she gasped. He was Reggie, the little boy she had been friends with at junior school. She had never heard from him again after she had returned to New York. In the time that had passed, Reggie had matured into a young man, but it was clear that he still had the aloof temperament she had known him to have when they were little children. She smiled warmly at him. Do you mind if I join your team? Reggie had recognized her immediately. Although she had been a young child when she had left Havana, her features hadn't changed much. She had become more refined, but she was just as beautiful then as when he had seen her last. He had watched her on the monkey bars, but hadn't said anything to anyone. He didn't answer, but picked up the basketball and threw it at her. She understood that he accepted her as a teammate, and she raised her eyebrows before she sprang into action. Rebecca moved swiftly, and her shots were accurate. She cleverly took advantage of loopholes and had a very competitive spirit. The taller boys realized that she was beating them, and they decided to gang up against her in the defense. Because she was shorter, they snatched the ball away a couple of times. Their luck was short-lived when Rebecca broke through their defense and caught Reggie's shot. She aimed, and the ball slid through the basket, scoring her team 2 points. A small crowd had gathered to watch the game, and they cheered loudly. They were particularly interested because girls seldom played basketball with the boys' team. The game soon became intense, and the players sweated with anticipation in scoring the highest points. Eventually, Rebecca scored the final point that took her team into the lead, and they won. Everyone applauded, and the atmosphere was lively. One of the team members ran to the tuck shop to buy some soda for everyone. When he returned, he passed the drinks to his teammates, but hesitated when he got to Rebecca. I'm sorry, I just realized I don't know what you want to drink. Rebecca smiled politely. I'm perfectly fine with any soda. She took a bottle from him, unscrewed the cap, and swallowed a large mouthful. The boys looked at her and burst out laughing, and one of them joked. We thought girls were fussy, but you've just proven us wrong. Rebecca laughed and finished the remaining soda in her bottle. The boy who had invited her to play with them approached her. Have you been here before? I don't think I've seen you around. He was sure he would have noticed her if she had been there before. Rebecca tossed the empty bottle into a nearby trash can. I used to live in Havana when I was in primary school, but I moved back to New York for high school. I'm here today to visit one of my old school friends. She's still in class right now. She then pointed at Reggie. He used to sit behind me in primary school. The boy gawked at Reggie. Why didn't you say anything? You even pretended not to know her. Another teammate poked him in the ribs. Yeah, did you forget her name? The first boy laughed. Reggie doesn't seem to be interested in girls. Every time one of the girls at school gives him a love letter, he just throws it in the trash can. The boys roared with laughter and began to tease him mercilessly. He's almost finished high school and still doesn't have a girlfriend. Yeah, Reggie, when are you going to get your act together? He's going to be single until he's old. They jeered and laughed, but Reggie just shrugged and ignored them until one of them turned to Rebecca. So, hotshot, what's your name? Rebecca was about to answer when Reggie looked her in the eyes. Hello, Rebecca. Long time no see. The school bell rang to indicate that the morning classes were over. The students eagerly hurried to the canteen for lunch. Fiona found Rebecca waiting for her outside her classroom and shrieked excitedly when she saw her. They hugged each other tightly and immediately started to chat. Fiona was the prettiest girl in school. The boys fawned over her. But they did a double take when they saw her with Rebecca. The tables in the canteen seated 4 at a table, and Fiona sat with Rebecca, Freddie, and another friend. Rebecca and Fiona had plenty to catch up on and chatted nonstop. The other children gawked at Rebecca with intense curiosity. One of the braver boys approached them. "How can 2 beautiful girls be sitting at one table?" Rebecca raised her eyebrows and pouted. "Who's the most beautiful?" The boy turned scarlet and stuttered something before he spun around and hurried away. Reggie watched the scene unfold and smiled to himself. Rebecca had planned to meet with Fiona during lunch before returning to her hotel. She had wanted to take a look at the fields of medicinal plants in the valley on the outskirts of town later that afternoon, but Fiona begged her to stay and attend afternoon classes. Rebecca shrugged helplessly. "I suppose I won't ever go to high school again, so where's the harm in sitting through one more afternoon of it?" Fiona cornered her teacher in the hallway and asked if Rebecca could sit in. She explained that she had already graduated and was about to start her training at the Air Force Academy. The teacher thought Rebecca would inspire her students to work hard to realize their dreams, so she happily agreed. Rebecca sat in the back row of the classroom and felt everyone stare at her. The teacher quickly explained who she was. "Rebecca skipped a grade in high school and has been accepted to train at the Air Force Academy. She's visiting her friend today and has agreed to join our lesson this afternoon. She's the perfect example of how working hard at school can help you achieve your dreams." The teacher's introduction made the students even more curious, and they continued to steal glances at her. Although every year group had students who graduated and went to university, very few were accepted into a military school, let alone the Air Force Academy. The students impatiently waited for the class to end so that they could talk to her. The bell rang, and the students surrounded Rebecca. But since no one knew her, they awkwardly stood around waiting for someone to make the first move. A girl with a pretty face approached her and smiled sweetly. "Hello, Rebecca. Do you still remember me?" Rebecca looked at her briefly, and then her eyes lit up. "Layla! Of course I remember you. You haven't changed a bit. You're still so cheerful, unlike your brother." Layla beamed and tugged at Reggie, who was standing next to her. "You see? I knew Rebecca would remember me." Fiona pushed through the small crowd and sat on Rebecca's desk. A few other students noticed the commotion and quickly hurried over to listen to the conversation. Layla smiled. "What's your major at the Air Force Academy?" Rebecca beamed and answered proudly. "I'm training to become a pilot, but I've also selected airplane engineering and maintenance. I want to design fighter jets one day." Layla gasped. "That's awesome! How exciting! I'm going to study software design like my mother." Rebecca grinned at her. "I bet you're just as smart as her. It's a good profession to go into." Layla gave Reggie the side eye. "My brother wants to learn financial management. How boring." She flicked him on the shoulder. "How come you're so quiet?" Reggie glared at her and snorted. "Yeah, whatever." Layla frowned at him and shrugged. "How long will it take you to learn to fly a plane?" Rebecca tugged a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not sure. I need to pass a lot of assessments on the flight simulators before I'm allowed in a real plane. I'll have to stay at the training base and will probably be away for at least a year and a half. That's why I came to see Fiona and other friends here in Havana." Reggie pricked up his ears and looked at her with a bemused smile. Rebecca patted Fiona's arm. "Do you see my skin is as pale as Fiona's? I'm sure by the time we'll see each other again, I'll be tanned just like I used to be back in primary school. The training base is out in the Mexican desert." Layla laughed. "Haven't you ever thought of using sunscreen?" Fiona nodded. "Yeah, look at me. I spend loads of time outside in the sun, but never burn my skin. I started using a sunscreen produced by a cosmetics company my dad has invested in. It's very effective. Rebecca looked at Fiona's pearly white skin and grinned. You'd better give me some of that. She was no longer the tomboy she used to be and started paying attention to her appearance. Fiona smiled. Sure, I'll ask my dad to organize a few bottles for you before you leave. Rebecca flicked her ponytail. Thanks, I'd appreciate that. I think I'd better work on myself if I want to have a boyfriend one day. Layla laughed. You're beautiful whether you're tanned or not. I don't think you'll have trouble finding a boyfriend. She looked at Rebecca and narrowed her eyes. Didn't you have a boyfriend in high school? Rebecca grinned. Maybe, maybe not. Layla's eyes widened suspiciously. Really? Fiona chuckled at Layla's serious expression. I wouldn't believe a word she says. She was so busy. I don't think she even had time for a boyfriend. She turned to Rebecca. Am I right or am I wrong? Rebecca nodded. You're right. I didn't have time to think about boys at all. But who knows? Maybe I'll end up marrying a pilot and we can fly through the skies together. Wouldn't that be cool? Layla's imagination began to run wild. Oh, I know. How about a flight instructor? Fiona laughed and teased her. And will you set them up to make it happen? Layla blushed and giggled. Rebecca laughed. By the way, how's Bruno? Layla's heart skipped a beat and she sighed. He went to university this year. Rebecca glanced at Reggie before leaning closer to Layla. Are you two dating? Layla turned scarlet and rolled her eyes at Reggie without answering Rebecca's question. Rebecca perceptively understood and put her finger against her lips. The bell rang again, signaling that it was time for the next class to begin, and the students hurried back to their desks. The afternoon wore on, and Rebecca politely listened to the teachers. When the final bell rang, she got up from her desk and hugged Fiona. I'll fly you around the world one day, I promise. Fiona chuckled and sighed. Yeah, I hope so. I'll start making my list of destinations in the meantime. Rebecca stuck her hand out for Fiona to shake. It's a deal. Then, she turned to Layla and hugged her tightly. Be good, and take care. Layla understood the subtle innuendo and smiled coyly. Finally, her gaze landed on Reggie, and she smiled at him. You've grown so tall. His mouth twitched, and he suddenly spoke. I want to ask you something. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Yeah, go ahead. He gestured for her to follow him into the corridor. When he was sure no one else could hear them, he looked her into the eyes. Why did you suddenly distance yourself from me? Rebecca was confused by Reggie's question, and she gave him a quizzical look. I didn't distance myself from you. What are you talking about? Ever since we were in elementary school, you haven't wanted much to do with me. Rebecca was still confused. That's not true. What about all the times you asked me out to play? I always went, didn't I? Or if you're talking about more recent times, I started to get really busy back in America. Fifi knows that my schedule's been basically full every day for years, especially during the weekends. I'm always learning all kinds of new things, and I guess that's why I haven't had time to come to Cuba and see you. Reggie looked at her suspiciously. He wasn't sure if she was being truthful, but her face looked innocent and honest. So it's just because you're busy all the time. Yeah. I'm sorry if it's still like that, but it can't be helped. I got so much on with preparing for the Air Force Academy and other stuff. She gave him an apologetic look, and he felt the doubt that he had been harboring for years melt away. He smiled. Okay, I get it. But why have you never asked me that before? Rebecca was curious to know why he was bringing the subject up after so many years had passed. We're old friends. You know you can talk to me any time, right? Reggie didn't respond. He looked away, feeling a little embarrassed, and then he changed the subject. Anyway, I wish you a bright future. Thank you, and I hope you achieve everything you've ever dreamed of. She smiled kindly at him. Then she turned to leave. He watched her walk away, and then he returned to the classroom to pack his things. As he was preparing to go to the canteen, his sister hurried over excitedly. Hey, what did you say to Rebecca just now? Nothing. He didn't look at Layla and carried on packing his bag. Something's not right here. You're not thinking of telling her how you feel, are you? I get it. You want to confess your feelings to her because you can see her getting prettier and prettier every day, and you're afraid you'll lose her. Am I right? No. Reggie frowned, but Layla wasn't ready to give up. Then why are you blushing? He glowered at his sister. You and Bruno. Come on, let's go eat. She interrupted her brother before he could finish his sentence. I'm going to have some pulled pork sliders from the canteen. He nodded and followed her to the restaurant. Later that day, after the evening self-study session, Reggie got into the car to go home. With his father's status, he could have attended an expensive private school and gone to an Ivy League college. But Oliver didn't want his son to be treated any differently. He wanted him to succeed because of his own hard work and dedication, not because of who his father was. As the car headed home, he thought about the mock exam he had taken that evening. As soon as he arrived, he got his books out and started the test. It was 11 o'clock by the time he finished the last question. He rubbed his eyes and went to take a shower before going to bed. As he looked up, he spotted an airplane flying through the darkened sky. He watched its flight lights flashing as it made its way toward its destination. He was lost in thought when his father's gruff voice broke through the silence. What are you looking at, Reggie? That airplane. Oliver followed his gaze and saw the plane that had attracted his son's attention. It was just an ordinary commercial plane, and he wondered what Reggie found so fascinating about it. I have a classmate who got into the Air Force Academy. She's training to be a pilot. A girl? Yes. Reggie's gaze was still fixated on the plane. And who is this girl? Someone you like? Oliver looked at his son intently, gauging his reaction. No, she isn't. Is that so? Oliver smirked, knowing his son wasn't being completely truthful. So you don't like this girl? Is there another girl you do like? No. Oliver thought for a moment as he watched his son struggle with his true emotions. Reggie, let me tell you something. Although it's important that the socially elite marry and produce heirs, we don't need to sacrifice our happiness just because we have wealth and status. Reggie looked at his father with confusion. Huh? What I mean is, even if you like a girl from a poorer background, it doesn't matter. Oliver looked at him with sincerity. You don't need to worry about her social status and position. What's important is her character and whether she really likes you. Reggie nodded and sighed with relief. A feel of joy welled up inside him. But there's one family that you can't ever get involved with, and that's the Davidson family, including the Davises from New York. You know the reason. Reggie nodded. Sure, I know. He looked up at the night sky again. The plane had disappeared, but he still had something on his mind. Dad, can I learn how to fly a plane? Oliver was taken aback. Why do you suddenly want to fly a plane? Is it because of that girl? Reggie shook his head. No, I just think I should learn some more practical skills. Oliver looked at his son skeptically. Again, he didn't really believe his response, but the boy was entitled to his privacy, so he didn't push him. Sure, I'll find someone to teach you. Thanks, Dad. Reggie grinned happily and headed off to the bathroom to take a shower. 2 days later, Rebecca reported for duty at the Air Force Academy. The academy was fully militarized, and its location was kept secret, so once school started, They weren't allowed to come and go as they pleased. They would have to wait until the end of the semester before they could go home. Nancy and Jonathan dropped their daughter off at school, and then they left. Rebecca had been instructed to go to her allocated dorm room and get settled in, so that's what she did first. She found her room and began to unpack. Her dorm was designated to sleep 4 people, but the instructor had told Rebecca that there would only be 3 girls in her room. She chose a bed and began to make it with the sheets and blankets that she had brought. Just then, she heard someone walk in, and she looked up to see a young woman and a man. Training hadn't officially started yet, so she wasn't surprised to see the man in the female-only dorm. She assumed he was a family member of the girl he was with. The girl had a young-looking face, her eyes were bright, and she had dimples on her cheeks, which made her look friendly and approachable. The young man with her was tall and good-looking. He dipped his head and said something to the girl that Rebecca couldn't hear. The girl chose one of the other beds, and she and her companion placed her things on top of it. Rebecca pointed at the closets. "There are 4 closets here, but there are only 3 of us in this room. I chose that one already." The girl smiled and held out her hand to Rebecca. "Hi, my name's Casey. I'm 16 years old. I'm worried I'm going to be the youngest person here." Rebecca smiled back and shook the girl's hand. "I'm Rebecca. I'm 17, so I'm not much older than you." Casey turned to her friend. "This is my childhood friend. His name's Tyler. He's a freshman at the university near here. He came to help me get settled in." "Are you training to be a pilot too?" Rebecca asked her. Casey shook her head. "No, I'm in the aviation and command division." Then her eyes widened and she looked at Rebecca in awe. "I think it's amazing that you're training to be a pilot. I heard that there are only 2 girls who got into the course this year. You must be one of them, and the other one's in the room across from ours." "It's great that more women are becoming military pilots. It's been something I've wanted to do ever since I was really young, so I've been preparing for this pretty much my whole life." The 2 roommates continued to get to know each other until it was time for lunch. They left with Casey's friend Tyler and found a place to eat outside. Later, Rebecca and Casey discovered that the other girl, who was to have been their 3rd roommate, had moved into a different dorm room. Apparently, another girl had withdrawn from the course, so she had taken her place in order that no one would be left in a room on their own. So it would only be the 2 of them in their 4-person room. Rebecca and Casey were grateful for the extra space. The next day was the first day of training. All the students attended an official opening ceremony, and then the instructors of each class briefed everyone on the upcoming physical training exercises. From that day onward, Rebecca and the rest of the trainees were expected to do a 40-minute run every morning and a 30-minute run every evening. It wasn't long before Rebecca's days were filled from early morning until late in the evening. Apart from the physical fitness training, the first-year students had to focus mostly on theoretical knowledge and learning all of the various rules and regulations of military aircraft flying. After 3 months of studying, Rebecca had gained a comprehensive understanding of her profession, and she knew exactly what would be expected of her once she graduated. But she was yet to put it all into practice. On one particular day, the instructor came to class with some exciting news. "Students, it's not often that first-year trainees get the opportunity to observe an aerial exercise so early on in their training. But this weekend, some of you will have just that. The Army has confirmed that 30 students across the school can be involved in its aerial display drill this Saturday." Rebecca's eyes lit up. She had done nothing but theory since she had arrived at the academy, and she was desperate to see some of what she had learned put into practice. But there were so many students in the school who majored in piloting, and only 30 could be selected. "Please let me be one of them." The instructor went on. "2 students have been selected from this class, and I will now call out their names. First up is Rebecca Gates." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat when she heard her name called out. She sprang to her feet excitedly. "Yes, that's me!" The instructor looked at her with astonishment. Students usually reacted with more restraint. She called out the name of the second successful student. Pedro Gonzalez. Here. The boy called Pedro Gonzalez raised his hand. Like Rebecca, he was also a freshman and had only been in the academy for 3 months. But he, too, had obviously proven himself a promising student. Rebecca wasn't surprised that Pedro had been selected. He was part of the Gonzalez family, whose company, the Gonzalez Group, had worked with her father's company at the air base in Mexico. Pedro had been in charge of the base and had since been promoted to the rank of general. The instructor continued her briefing. All right, so you two students that have been selected need to be at the academy gates at 7 o'clock sharp on Saturday morning. I'll meet you there, and we'll go to the drill ground together. The remaining students were mostly disappointed that they hadn't been chosen, but there was nothing they could do about it. So they were supportive of their classmates. You guys have to tell us about it when you get back. Pedro ignored them, but Rebecca nodded and replied pleasantly. Sure, no problem. I'll have a full account for you all as soon as I get back. Everyone laughed. Almost all of her fellow students were male, and they all looked at their female colleague enviously. The following Saturday morning, Rebecca woke up at 5:30 a.m. and ran for the best part of an hour. Then, she took a quick shower and ate breakfast. By 7 o'clock, she had already been waiting at the academy gates for 5 minutes. A bus arrived, and Rebecca and Pedro were taken to the aerial display ground, along with the other 28 chosen trainees. The drill ground was located in a special base on the outskirts of the city. Rebecca and the other students got out of the bus, and she instantly felt a thrill of excitement. The smell of aircraft fuel hung in the air, and the purr of engines could be heard in the distance. Transport and fighter planes were parked on the tarmac and in the valley, while elsewhere, infantry, paratroops, artillery, and electronic combat troops were preparing for the day's activities. The medical team was on the ground, ready for any emergencies that might arise. The atmosphere was tense, and Rebecca reveled in it. She had seen an air display before in Mexico, but its purpose had been to test the newly developed aircraft. There had been no significant military involvement or sense of excitement like she was feeling at the moment. She gazed around in awe and tried her best to take in as much of the action as she could. At 9 o'clock, a Major General of the Air Force announced the start of the exercise, and Rebecca saw the many different soldiers run to their respective posts. The leader of the group from the Airborne Brigade wore his military helmet and stood tall and straight. As he passed Rebecca, he glanced at her. Their eyes met for a split second, and she tried to get a good look at the man's face under his helmet. But because it came down almost to his eyes, it cast a shadow over his face, and she was unable to see his features. The fact that her eyes had briefly met his felt surreal. The man reached his fighter jet and quickly jumped into the cockpit. Rebecca read the jet's serial number. DK10885. She retracted her gaze and looked at Pedro beside her. It looked like his attention was focused on the same fighter jet. Just then, Rebecca's instructor approached her group and signaled to everyone to follow her and the other staff members. The students followed in an orderly manner until they came to a large aircraft hangar with a big screen at one end. Soon, a deafening roar came from the starting line, and the first group of airplanes took off. Rebecca felt the blood rushing through her veins. She wanted nothing more than to be in one of those jets. She recalled that day in Mexico several years earlier when she and Kyle had soared into the sky together. I wonder what he's doing now. As she pondered Kyle's whereabouts, she saw the jet with the serial number DK10885 soar ahead, and she stared fixated as it flew past. She barely noticed the artillery troops on the ground launched into action. The aircraft currently in flight were divided into 2 groups, one red and one blue, and they were facing off against each other in the valley. The pilot who had locked eyes with Rebecca earlier completed a stunning assault and told his co-pilot to prepare to project. Laser beams shot from the plane and locked onto a simulated target on the ground. With a blast, the jet gracefully rose up, and the target on the ground disappeared. "Beautiful," the co-pilot said. "It certainly is." But the two men weren't talking about the same thing. Kyle had known for a while that Rebecca had become a student at the Air Force Academy. At first, he hadn't realized that Rebecca Gates was, in fact, Rebecca Davis. He had been at Pedro's house one day, and he had spotted a photo that Pedro had taken at the start of his own training at the academy. The photo was of all the new students in his class, and because there were only 2 girls training to be pilots, Kyle had taken a keen interest in both of them. One of the girls was nice-looking, and she had a pretty smile, but she didn't stand out in any particular way. But the other girl made Kyle feel the way he had felt when he had seen Rebecca for the first time. He took a closer look at her image in the photo, and there was something about her that seemed familiar. He was sure there was a vague resemblance to the young Rebecca. He recalled the day when he had seen her for the first time. He had been in his brother Jose's kindergarten class, and she had seemed so small. Then, he thought about the time in Mexico when he had taken her up in the airplane. She had squealed excitedly and had given him a broad smile. He thought back to how they had run with sandbags together as their punishment and had done push-ups every night. He had watched as her skin had gradually tanned over time. He had loved his golden glow. Since then, she had grown up and was on the cusp of adulthood. He wasn't surprised when he had heard that she had qualified to train as a fighter pilot. It was what she had been longing for her whole life. So when he saw Pedro's class photo, he asked him who the girl was. "That's Rebecca Gates." Kyle repeated the name Rebecca, and his eyes filled with hope. "It is her. I guess I can understand why she changed her surname." 3 months later, when Kyle heard that the commanders of the aerial exercise were planning to invite some Air Force Academy students, he had gone to his superior and asked him to select Rebecca Gates. He had had no influence in Pedro's selection process. He had known he would be picked as he was one of the most promising students. Kyle would once again get to meet the girl of his dreams. She was no longer the young girl he remembered. She was virtually a woman, and he hoped desperately that she would remember him. On the big screen in the aircraft hangar, Rebecca watched the fighter jet rise and fall through space as it continued on its practice mission. She and her fellow students shouted and pointed in awe at the skillful maneuvers of the pilot. Outside, the roar of the engines and the sounds of simulated battle rattled in the tin construction of the surrounding buildings, and the ground shuddered beneath her. Following the action on the big screen wasn't enough for Rebecca, and she moved toward the opening in the hangar so that she could watch in real time. She inhaled the smells of aircraft fuel and burning rubber, and she never felt so exhilarated in her life. The medical team was carrying out a simulated rescue and had rushed to the side of an injured airman. Within seconds, the medics had brought the wounded person down from his aircraft and sketchered him away to the medical tent. For the first time, Rebecca realized the cruelty and brutality of the battlefield, and she sucked in a sharp breath. And this is only a drill. What if it was a real battlefield? Would I be afraid? Would I be able to make calm and considered judgments? Rebecca momentarily blanked out the deafening sounds around her and lost herself in her thoughts. I think I need to spend some time with the army in Mexico so that I can walk beside those soldiers and truly understand them. The drill became more and more intense until, eventually, everyone put on their silencer earphones. Rebecca realized that everything she saw was exactly how it had been described to her by her instructor. She wished desperately that she could put the theory into practice. She longed to operate the instruments and judge various situations herself. There were so many emergency permutations that could only be fully remembered and understood through experience. The drill went on until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but for some time after, smoke hung in the air. Rebecca felt as if she had experienced a feast of the soul. That kind of feeling couldn't be described with words. As the drill drew to a close, lunch was served at the base. Everyone had gotten up early, but in the thrill of the day, no one had realized just how hungry they were until the food came out. The trainees were served simple food, cheeseburgers and soda, and everyone wolfed it down. The burgers were quite small, so they were all served two, but Rebecca couldn't eat her second one. She pushed her plate toward Pedro, who was sitting beside her and hungrily making his way through his second burger. "I'm stuffed. Do you want another one?" Pedro's eyes lit up, and he accepted the extra food gratefully. "Thank you." His mouth was full of food. Rebecca couldn't imagine how anyone could possibly eat 3 burgers, especially someone as slim as Pedro. I guess that's the difference between girls and guys. In the afternoon, the troops were busy preparing for the second drill performance that was to take place the following morning. Everything had to be cleaned up and returned to its starting position. The Air Force Academy students volunteered to help tidy up and get things ready for the next day, before settling in for the night. They would be staying in a shared house at the base. Because there were only 2 females, Rebecca was to share a room with the other girl. It was dark by the time they were done with their work, and most of the students returned to the house. Rebecca liked to run in the evenings, and even though the day had been tiring, she changed into her jogging gear and headed back outside. There were few lights, so the place was shrouded in an eerie darkness. The only light came from the moon that occasionally peeked out from behind the clouds. The area was vast, and Rebecca decided she would run 1 full lap of the base. By the time she completed it, she was utterly exhausted, and she stopped near a small hill to regain her breath and stretch before heading back to the house. In the silence, she could hear the intermittent sound of music coming from somewhere, but she couldn't tell where it was coming from. She followed the sound and saw a young man in camouflage uniform and military boots sitting on top of a nearby mound. Beside him lay his military cap. His long legs were laid out in front of him, and Rebecca could tell that he was tall. He was playing music with what appeared, in the darkness, to be a leaf of some sort. The leaf was clearly not an easy instrument to play, which explained why the man was unable to play a consistent tune for longer than a few seconds. A sliver of moonlight shone through the clouds, and Rebecca strained to see the man's face, but all she could make out was his outline, and the fact that his hair was cut short in a custom military style. As he blew on the leaf, he kept looking up at the sky, as if it were the place he yearned for. Rebecca watched him for a while, and then she followed his gaze and stared into the darkness. After a while, the man stopped and looked around. He didn't seem surprised to see Rebecca looking up at him. "Do you want to come and join me up here?" Rebecca hadn't expected him to be so forward, and she giggled awkwardly. "No, I don't think I can climb up there." The hill was more than 10 feet high. Its surface was smooth, and it looked quite steep to Rebecca. She was afraid that she would slide back down and make a fool of herself if she attempted to climb it. The man smiled down at her, and there was a moment of gentleness in the firm masculinity of his outline. "What do you want to hear?" Rebecca liked the sound of his voice. It was smooth and mellow and very pleasant to the ear. She desperately wanted to see his face, but the clouds seemed to be purposely playing with her, and the moon remained tightly concealed. She felt a little vexed, but then she felt a sense of relief. Why do I care so much about what he looks like? Just met him. It's no big deal. Then she remembered he had asked her a question. "Can you play something by Pippa Lang? I love her music." "I'll give it a go." He paused as he thought of the tune. Then he began to play. So Rebecca sat at the foot of the hill, and the soldier sat at the top, and the music reverberated around them both. The soldier played a short part of the tune with his leaf, and then he stopped and looked at Rebecca. "That's all I know of that one. What else do you want to hear?" "Why don't we take a break from the music, and we can chat instead?" "Okay." There was a pause as they each waited for the other to start the conversation. The soldier spoke first. "How did you feel when you saw the drill today?" Rebecca thought carefully about her answer. I felt that war is cruel, but at the same time, I found it invigorating. What I learned is that, as a pilot, I've still got a long way to go. There's so much more I need to learn and practice. Are you afraid? Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be? But I'm hoping that the moment I get inside that plane, the adrenaline will take over, and I won't be afraid anymore. I still feel the same way. Rebecca was surprised to hear that. You do? I thought you soldiers had no fear at all. What kind of soldier are you anyway? I'm currently assigned to the airborne unit, and I'm hoping I'll be sent on a mission one day. He paused briefly. Did you see the DK-10885 fighter jet today? That's mine. Rebecca's eyes widened. That was you? Were you the pilot or co-pilot? The soldier chuckled. Which one do you think? Rebecca knew instinctively that he was the main pilot. You walked past me before the drill started, right? Yeah. Rebecca wondered if he was going to come down from the mound so that she could get a better look at him, but he seemed quite happy to stay up there. Oh, how I wish I could see his face. She had a strange, unfamiliar feeling deep inside her, but she was unable to explain. She couldn't even see the man's face, yet she was drawn to him somehow. In a weird way, felt as if she had known him for some time. They sat there in silence for a while, both of them looking out in the darkness. Rebecca tried to stifle a yawn, but he caught her. You should go get some sleep. You have to be up early tomorrow. Sure, I guess you do too. She got to her feet. Have a good day tomorrow, and be careful. I'm always careful. Rebecca held up her hand in a static wave. Well, bye then. Bye. The man watched her as she walked back toward the shared house, and then he began to play with his leaf again. Rebecca instantly recognized the tune. It was an old classic, and she found herself slowing down to listen. It was only when he stopped that she continued on her way. But just then, she sensed movement behind her, and she swung around. He jumped off the mound and was heading toward her. He had put on his military cap, and the epaulets on his shoulders made them appear exceptionally broad. The camouflage print on his pants was dark, and he almost blended into the night. As Rebecca had thought, he was a tall man. In her mind, he was the perfect figure of masculinity. He walked toward her with a military-trained, straight-back posture, and he gave off an air of mystery and intrigue. He caught up to her and stood alongside her. He assessed their height difference with the palm of his hand. What are you, about 5'7"? The silkiness of his voice caused her heart to skip a beat. She was about to answer, but he turned and walked away. Enjoy your evening. Rebecca stood rooted to the spot, bemused by his unexpected actions. Then she spun around to face his retreating back. Hey, have we met before? But her voice melted into the darkness, and the man didn't reply. At that moment, the mischievous moon stuck its head out from behind a cloud and illuminated the soldier's back, making him look like some ethereal being. Rebecca gazed at his elongated shadow, and a soft smile formed on her lips. It doesn't matter what he looks like. Today has been a pretty good day all around. The next day, the drill continued as planned. The activities were even more intense than the previous day's events, so much so that in the aircraft hangar, the students' cheering and excitement were greater than ever. But by the end of the exercise, most of the trainees had fallen into a somber mood. The almost realistic combat that they had witnessed over the past 2 days brought home to them just how dangerous their chosen profession was. And it made them think of the future. They had chosen that path, and there were some that might go on to regret it. Others wondered if they were truly cut out for such a high-octane pressure. Again, the students helped tidy up, but no one spoke. Rebecca's eye was drawn to the platoons of airborne troops that were scattered around the site, assisting with the cleanup. But there were so many of them that it was impossible to tell which one was the man she had met the previous night. By the time evening was back in its place, the bus was waiting to take the trainees back to the academy. Rebecca, Pedro, and the others all saluted to the base, thanked their hosts again, and got on the bus. The whole experience had been one of the most profound lessons of their lives, and each one of them appreciated what it meant for their future careers. In the weeks and months that followed, Rebecca would occasionally think of the soldier and his strange music. The more she thought about it, the more melancholy she felt the music had been, as if he had been expressing his experiences and thoughts through it. Every day was filled with classes. Any spare time was used to absorb new knowledge. Her life revolved around the classroom, library, and her room. Until at last, the end of the semester arrived and they were allowed to go home. Rebecca thought of the insight she had gained during the exercise days, and she called her father to tell him that she wanted to go to his airbase in Mexico to take another look around. As it happened, Jonathan was at the airbase at the time, and he got his assistant to arrange for Rebecca to join him. So, Rebecca left the school for the first time in months and headed to the airport. Her flight to Mexico City involved a transfer to Colombia, where she would have a 6-hour stopover. She planned to take advantage of the 6 hours and do some cultural sightseeing in Bogota. She went through the security check, and just as she sat down in the departure hall to wait for her flight to Colombia, she received a call from Pedro. The call surprised her because he wasn't usually the kind of guy to take the initiative to contact her. "Hey, Pedro." He'd always been a man of few words, and his call was no exception. "Where are you?" "I'm at the airport." "Are you flying home to New York?" "No, I'm going to Mexico via Colombia." "Okay, got it." Pedro hung up the phone and turned to the person sitting on the deck beside him. "She's going to Mexico and stopping in Colombia." Kyle plucked a leaf from a plant and grinned. "Good." Rebecca was a little confused about Pedro's phone call, but she quickly switched her attention to the information she was given on Colombia. She saw that it was a country with year-round conflict, but the capital was known to be relatively safe and very interesting with its cobblestoned center. She finished studying the map and got ready to board the plane. After a few hours, the plane landed at El Dorado International Airport in Bogota. Rebecca filled in all the required paperwork for entry into the country and then made her way through the various checkpoints on her way out. The weather was warm. She only carried a small bag with water and some cash as she took her first steps onto Colombian soil. She got into a taxi that had been waiting by the roadside and then used her phone to take some pictures through the window. Although the main language in Colombia was Spanish, the driver knew enough English to make communication easy. When they reached her destination, Rebecca paid for the ride and took some time to upload a few of her better photos onto social media. She was just starting a live stream when she heard an explosion in the distance. She was shocked and looked around what she believed to be a relatively safe place. She hadn't expected things to change that quickly. After the first explosion, concentrated gunfire followed. The entire city suddenly seemed to be in a state of panic. There were tourists looking around in fear, and a couple of them were hit by bullets that seemed to fly out of nowhere. Seeing others hit only increased the panic. People ran around like headless chickens, fleeing in all directions. Another huge explosion sounded from a residential area in the opposite direction of the first huge bang. Rebecca shivered as she realized the severity of the situation, and that the first place she had scoped for shelter might not work at all. She listened carefully. There were no signs of the fighter aircraft in the sky, so she concluded that it was ground fire. She decided it would be better to stay put rather than run. She strategized quickly and fell to the ground, trying her best to mingle with the people who had been dropped by the gunfire. Because she was so close to the wounded and dying, she was overwhelmed by the stench of blood. She had made the right call, because a gunfight broke out on both sides of the street not long after she lay down. Both sides were firing at full force, and innocent people were being caught in the crossfire. Miserable screams sounded incessantly, Rebecca was in the middle of a town square. There were stone platforms on 3 sides of her, but on the other side, it was open, and there were civilians covered in blood. She didn't move. She peeked through the hair that had covered her face, looking for an opportunity. She sensed that one side had already started to retreat because it had gone quiet after the initial burst of gunfire. And then she heard another explosion in a different direction. Rebecca stayed where she was, and she paled as she realized that someone was approaching. From her position on the ground, she could hear the sound of boots getting closer. It was obvious from the pattern of the sound of the steps that the person was stepping over bodies. The footsteps were heavy, as though they were wearing military boots. She believed that if they were from the local government, things would be okay. But if they were members of the local militia, it could be troublesome. She also knew that in reality, good things didn't often follow bad. When she saw the clothes that they were wearing, her heart turned to ice. She tried to manage to stealthily switch her phone to silent mode and had kept the live stream running to inform others about what was happening. But it was too late to make a call. Everything was over in just a few minutes, and then someone started to clean up the battle scene. The bodies on the ground were unceremoniously lifted and thrown into the back of a truck, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Rebecca tried to relax her body, but when she was thrown into the car, she almost vomited because of the smell. She managed to hold it in and turned her mind to where they were going. The sky gradually turned dark as they left the outskirts of Bogota. The roads were bumpy, and the jolting brought some of the injured back to consciousness. A couple of them screamed in fear, and the sound was loud enough for the driver to step on the brakes. The rebel fighter in the passenger seat jumped down and went to the back of the pickup truck. He raised the gun he was holding and aimed it at the man's head. The screaming stopped quickly, and the gunshot rang out. It was clear afterward that the person was no longer breathing. After he had fired that shot, he aimed at the others in the truck. He was going to shoot again because he found the noise annoying. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a slender figure suddenly jumped up and moved nimbly behind him. The man was shocked and tried to use the butt of his gun to hit his assailant. At the same time, he felt something hard being pressed into his back and assumed it was a gun. "If you move again, I will shoot," Rebecca said. He didn't move. "Put down your gun." The man hesitated slightly, but he did as she asked. As soon as he did, she threw away the glass bottle in her hand and quickly picked up the gun that he had put down. She jumped back and aimed at his head, which was annihilated by the resulting shot. By that time, the driver had noticed that something was wrong and had gotten out of the car with his own gun. He emerged only to have a bullet go straight through his temple. Rebecca was terrified and was covered in cold sweat. It had gotten dark, and the sun was shallow on the horizon. Rebecca didn't have time to think, and her instincts took her to the driver's seat. She kicked the dead man away and closed the door. Everything had gone quiet. The back of the pickup truck was filled with people whose fates were unknown. The wind blew past her ears as she drove back the way they had come. She remembered that they had passed by a town. It hadn't seemed big, and she hadn't seen any people around. She thought about going there to find a place to hide and wait for rescue. The night gradually darkened until the entire world seemed black, except for the stars in the sky and the 2 beams of light from the truck. Rebecca held the steering wheel tightly. She felt numb. There had been dozens of people dumped in the back. She wondered if any of them were alive, or if she was transporting corpses. She couldn't hear any movement from behind her. The evening breeze was a little chilly, which matched the feeling in her heart. She drove to the town and did some quick calculations. She then turned around and drove away again, back in the direction she had come from. Several miles out, she saw an opportunity and jumped out of the truck while it was still moving. It continued forward into a ditch, and because of its weight, it rolled to the bottom, where it wouldn't be easily seen from the side of the road. She then returned to the town on foot. The darkness enveloped her, but she didn't dare to use the flashlight of her phone. She had only the starlight to guide her. She didn't know why, but she suddenly thought back to her younger years when she and Kyle had been running together. It had been just as dark by the time they had finished their punishment for the day. The wind blew on the empty desert road. Rebecca felt cold and wrapped her arms around herself. She easily walked the distance to the town, and under the cover of the darkness, she found an abandoned house. She finally felt that she could relax a little, and she stretched to relieve the tension in her body. She checked her phone and found that there was still no signal. In Colombia, she knew that it was common for militant parties to install signal jammers. Rebecca didn't know if any of the footage from her live stream or her last location had been useful to anyone. What she did know was that she needed a safe place to recover her strength. She leaned against the dusty wall and tried to calm herself as she closed her eyes to rest. Her body was slowly letting go of the day's stresses when she heard a faint sound of an engine. She bolted upright and hid in a pile of straw. The sound of the engine got louder, and she could hear people talking in the local dialect. She wasn't sure if their arrival was fortuitous or dangerous. As the sound got closer and closer, she realized that some of the people were injured. They were clearly using the town as a temporary bolt hold to recuperate and regroup. Someone turned on some lights. They lit a fire at one place, and when Rebecca heard the sound, she was worried that they would want to use the straw she was under to light another one. She found a big clay pot and climbed into it. Sure enough, not long after, she heard people enter the room she was in and look around. She stayed hidden in the pot and didn't move a muscle. She tried to keep her breathing as shallow and quiet as possible. It wasn't a peaceful night because, as time wore on, the sound of gunfire penetrated the air once more. The continuous gunshots rang in her ears, and she guessed that a few stray bullets had only just missed her hiding place. The group managed to defend their position, but there were many casualties. She could hear people cursing, as well as the painful cries of the injured. From time to time, the smell of blood came to her in waves. She retched several times, but she managed once again to hold it in. At the same time, a handful of fighter planes were circling in the sky above Colombia. Jonathan had seen Rebecca's live stream, but by the time it had come to his attention, she had been in trouble for 3 hours already. As quickly as he could, he scrambled 6 fighter jets from the military base in Mexico and flown straight to Colombia. He wanted more, but he had only been able to find the personnel to fly that many. He had also contacted the Colombian government to explain his intentions. The government had a strong relationship with the U.S., so they had agreed immediately to Jonathan's request for air entry. They had also asked for help to overcome the militant forces behind the attacks. It had taken 4 hours for Jonathan to get to Mexico, and he hadn't expected Kyle to be there when he had arrived. He had seen Kyle a few times over the years and knew that he served in the United States Air Force. Kyle had hitched a ride from the U.S. on a private plane. Because he had been in a hurry and wasn't on official business, he didn't have anything with him. The first thing he asked for from Jonathan was a gun. He also wanted a plane. Jonathan had heard of Kyle's skills in the air, and he knew that he didn't have time to second-guess why he had made the effort to be there. He gave Kyle access to a fighter jet and handed him a lot of ammunition. Because Rebecca had gone missing not long after she had broadcast her predicament, the combat planes had to cooperate with the ground troops they had been assigned by the government. They split up to search for their target. Time gradually passed, and the sun started to show over the horizon. Rebecca's entire body had gone numb in the pot. She knew that she wouldn't last much longer, so she planned to quietly stretch her body. At that moment, an engine roared again. Rebecca was sensitive to the sound of planes, and she instantly tensed up again. The Colombian militants had been fighting on the ground for such a long time, so she knew that the fighter jets had to be from somewhere else. Her heart started to race, but she stayed where she was and listened carefully. She could tell that the current occupiers of the town had heard the aircraft. Someone cursed and went out to check. The fighter jets flew past the town and turned as if to leave. Rebecca felt anxious, and she fumbled for her phone. There was still no signal. She was burning with anxiety when she heard another explosion in the distance. But when she looked back at her phone, she discovered that it was trying to connect to the internet. She suddenly understood everything. They were trying to blow up the signal jammer. Colombia wasn't a massive country, so she didn't think it would be too hard to find them all from the air and destroy them. She knew that without them, she could send her location. She was delighted, but just as she was about to pin her location, there was a sudden movement from just outside her hiding place. She didn't dare do anything more and maintained absolute silence. She didn't know what the person was doing, but she thought she heard them exit again. Everything seemed calm, but she continued to listen carefully. When she confirmed that there was no sound, she quietly went on her phone again and shared her location. Once her phone was signaling her location, her heart started to pound. She heard a voice. "Hello?" She could tell that someone was coming toward her. The person's footsteps were getting closer, and she imagined that it was the Grim Reaper headed her way. She had a gun in her hand. It was a weapon that she had practiced a lot with as a youngster. She had also practiced freestyle fighting as well as various techniques to escape from holds. Unfortunately, the situation she found herself in was very different. She was alone and surrounded by militia. The feet stopped by the large pot, and she heard a hand being placed on top of it. Rebecca held the gun tightly. At one point, she was wondering if the only way out would be to kill the person immediately outside her hiding place. But then she worried that she might have to commit suicide before she could be taken. She didn't like the idea of that being her ending, especially when help had been so close. It was at that moment that the sound of the fighter jets came again. They sounded almost directly overhead, and it caused the owner of the hand to back away again. She heard footsteps heading toward the door, and she guessed that he was looking at the sky as he cursed. His words were immediately followed by the sound of gunfire. Although Rebecca couldn't see anything, she could hazard a guess about what was happening. She believed that the pilot of one of the jets was firing at the rebel fighters on the ground. She knew that Colombia didn't have many registered fighter pilots, and she guessed that the planes were being piloted by people from other areas. She knew that Jonathan was coming, and that he would have mobilized all the people he could. She was also well aware that because of the shortage of accredited fighter pilots, there would only be one on each aircraft. Her guess was correct, and the pilot in the jet overhead at that point was taking evasive action to avoid being shot by the militants' heavy machine guns before firing again. His shooting was accurate, and the militia was dropping in number, but the pilot couldn't see Rebecca or anything to indicate her position. All of a sudden, he saw someone waving at him with both arms. He focused on what was happening and stopped firing. Rebecca had been brought out of the building, and there was a gun pointing at her temple. 2 minutes earlier, Rebecca had tried to leave her hiding place because she knew that she had been compromised. She had been unaware that the person had still been in the room, and they had shot at her before she could react. She hadn't even had the time to level her own weapon before she had been bundled out as a hostage. There was a momentary silence when she was brought out. No one shot from either side, and the fighter aircraft just circled in the air. It was dawn, and the fighter jets were outlined by the light. It was a sight that Rebecca had yearned to see since she was young. She could see straight away that they were fighting the new generation fighters developed in Mexico 10 years before. The militia aimed their guns at her. One of them walked forward with a megaphone pointed at the aircraft. "Land immediately, or I'll kill her." His words were followed by the sound of guns being cocked. The aircraft slowly landed a short distance away from them, and a tall young man jumped down from one of the planes. He was wearing a helmet, and Rebecca couldn't see his face clearly. She noticed the way he walked, with strength and a barely contained wildness, and she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. In her heart, she knew who it was he reminded her of, but she also knew that he was in another country and couldn't possibly be there. He walked toward them, alone, with a gun in his hand. Rebecca looked wide-eyed at her rescuer and didn't know what to feel. Half of the guns that had been aimed at her were now aimed at the man walking their way, but he didn't falter at all. She watched him in her periphery as she glanced around, and she roughly estimated that there were more than 10 armed men. She realized that the local militia had suffered many casualties during the night, and that some had also just been killed by the fighter pilots. She had thought there would be more militia from the sounds of the footsteps and other noises that she had heard. Time slowed, and then seemed to stop altogether. Rebecca turned her full gaze back to the pilot and saw that he was also looking at her. He was wearing a helmet that shaded his eyes slightly, but they were still piercing. He stared straight at her as he walked until he was only 5 yards away, and then he stood still. The same person who had shouted through the megaphone called out new instructions. "Put down your gun, now!" The man raised his hands and made a gesture of acquiescence. He then looked at Rebecca and nodded. She instantly understood his meaning and used her eyes to communicate the fact before she looked down. The rescuer allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction at her reaction. The man holding Rebecca urged her forward, but instead of moving, she suddenly raised her elbow and slammed it into him. A split second later, in a moment of freedom, she threw herself onto the ground. Gunshots rang out as soon as Rebecca fell. The pilot's bullets reached the people behind her before they could react, and they fell to the ground. The others in their group reacted quickly and shot in the pilot's direction. Rebecca was just as quick to react, though, and she picked up a gun from where she had fallen and returned fire. There was no cover for her or her rescuer where they were, so he pulled her up and they ran together to find a place to hide. They passed through the rain of bullets and ended up where Rebecca had been hiding earlier. The man took off his helmet and put it on her head. "You need to wear this. The plan is to get to the plane and leave." She did the helmet up and looked at the person beside her. By that time, the sun was high in the sky, and she could make out all the little details she hadn't noticed earlier about her rescuer. He stood against the light, and his skin had a healthy golden hue. His facial features were well honed, and the lighting made his face look exceptionally chiseled. A young boy's face quickly flashed in Rebecca's memory, and she could see that young face shadowed in the one in front of her. Before she could say anything, he pulled her to the side to dodge a bullet heading their way. He aimed and shot, and another of the fighters were disposed of. "Let's get to the jet now." He grabbed her hand and was about to leave when all hell broke loose. A member of the militia had picked up a bag filled with an unknown substance and had fired into it before he was shot at. Rebecca found herself wrapped in her rescuer's arms, and time seemed to suddenly slow again, although only for a second. She heard the man's laughter before he died. The expected pain didn't come. Rebecca was puzzled, and she felt herself being released. She looked up nervously. "Are you all right?" The man who had come to her rescue closed his eyes tightly. "The powder is poisonous. I can't open my eyes. I can't see anything." She was shocked, but alert enough to spy another rebel fighter rushing their way. She pulled the man against the wall and shot at the newcomer. She wounded him at the first shot and killed him with the second. The man beside her still had his eyes tightly closed, but he was resolute. "We have to get to the jet immediately." Rebecca nodded and tucked his hands into hers. "Follow my lead. Don't worry about anything. I'll keep them all back." The man nodded, and they ran together. Along the way, Rebecca helped him dodge their opponents, and they made it safely to the jet. "Your poor eyes." She searched for a bottle of water on board, but she found nothing at all to help him. She then saw 2 jeeps approaching containing more local militia, and the man also heard the commotion. He guided her as best he could into the front seat with him. It was only designed for one person, so their bodies were tightly pressed together. "There's no time," he said. "You're going to have to fly the plane." Rebecca had no time to care about being squeezed into a single seat with her rescuer. She was still trying to take in what he had said. She looked at him sideways. "You want me to fly the plane?" She shook her head. "I don't know how to pilot a plane, and you can't see. This is a plane, not a car. We'll die." "If we die, then so be it." His voice was calm and nonchalant. Rebecca felt her stress levels subside. "All right, teach me. Have you studied the plane's controls and instruments?" Fortunately, she had already learned the theory of flying at the Air Force Academy, and Jonathan had given her a lot of information about that model of aircraft, so she knew the controls. She nodded, but then remembered that he couldn't see. "How do we operate it?" "Start the engine. Once we're in the air, you can activate automatic cruise mode. You'll also have to activate the radar to avoid being hit by the enemy's artillery fire." His eyes remained closed as he continued. "Do you see the red activation button? Press it first, and then the green one. Pay attention to the instruments at all times, and when the critical value is reached, prepare to pull up." "Okay." Rebecca was studying everything when bullets started to land on the fighter jet. She didn't have the luxury of time to adjust the situation. She followed his instructions and started the engine. As she pressed the green button, the jet started to move forward at full speed. Being a fighter jet, it reached a critical point in just a few seconds. Rebecca reached out to pull the lever to lift them into the air, but she quickly realized that she couldn't move it. "I can't shift it." The man reached over and covered the back of her hand with his, and they pulled it up together. When he spoke again, it felt like his voice was drilling straight into her ears in a small, sealed space. "Little Rebecca, pay attention to the instruments at all times." She was too busy to reply because she could feel the plane rising. She had always loved that feeling, but it was extra special to be the one in control in the cockpit of a fighter plane. The man's hand was still on hers. It was warm, and it was big enough to completely envelop hers and the engine shaft. The plane had already entered cruise mode, and they were climbing consistently. "Look to see whether they have gunners or not." Rebecca forced herself to stay calm and focus on the radar screen. They had avoided many bullets, but she saw bigger ammunition rounds heading their way. "Yes, they do." "Don't panic. Use your position to lock onto their trajectory." He wriggled around to reach the instrument panel and felt for a button. "Here." "Okay." She locked onto the path of the rocket coming after them, and then took over control of the plane to swerve and avoid the rocket. He wasn't sure it was over. Are there more? They had to swerve several more times before they were safe, but it wasn't long before he highlighted their next problem. "We don't have enough oxygen, so we can't fly high. Hold on tight." He pushed the engine lever back the other way, entering manual mode, and dropped the bomb. Rebecca shook violently, but as soon as they dived, she locked onto the target on the ground and let the bomb go. It exited the jet and fell in line with the target. At the same time, she felt his hand suddenly tighten. She was pushed back in her seat, and the world went black for a moment. A huge explosion came from below, and their plane soared into the sky, surrounded by flames.